Hi guys, welcome back to my channel. Today I'm going to be talking about the 14 books I read in December. And the first one was Lady Macbeth, and I rated this one 3 stars. So it's a retelling of Macbeth, but it's told through Lady Macbeth's perspective. So the book's synopsis drew me in, and I really liked the cover of the book because the person on the cover looked to me like Anya Taylor-Joy. Anya Taylor-Joy. There we go. I can say words. But the book itself just didn't work for me, whether through the language used throughout, or the rushed ending, or the rushed relationships with the characters. It just did not work for me. It didn't work like I thought it was, and then sometimes the language they use, because it's supposed to be Scottish and Old Scottish, was just very hard to understand or to figure out who they were talking about, places, landmarks. It just took me out of the book a little bit. But the book had really good imagery throughout, especially when Lady Macbeth, she has a name, I can't remember her name, but I'm just going to call her Lady Macbeth, used her powers, and so that imagery was really good. And I really hated Macbeth in this one. I haven't read the story Macbeth. I've seen it in like play version, but in this book I hated Macbeth, and I think in most iterations people really hate Lady Macbeth. I could be wrong, you can let me know down below, but I did not like Macbeth in this one. And the book was less than 300 pages, but it still dragged on for me because of all the issues I had with it. The second book I read was A Society of Lies, and I rated this one 4.25 stars. So after graduating 10 years prior from Princeton, Maya is back to see her sister graduate, but her sister has been found dead. And this brings back memories of a similar situation that happened to Maya while she was in school. So are these two instances related, or is there something else sinister happening at Princeton? This book was very fast-paced, and I liked the dual perspective between Naomi, who is Maya's sister, and Maya herself. It was well written, and it kept me hooked to read. The whodunit was kind of easy to figure out, especially at the end, but there was a nice twist within it within the last few pages, which I did not see coming. I really liked this book. The third book I read was Scarlet Witch's Road, and I rated that one 4 stars. So Wanda goes to multiple different places to get rid of hexes, do exorcisms, and defeat the Emerald Warlock in 5 issues. It's a collection, so the story takes place in 5 issues. I like the ideas presented, but I wish the Witch's Road was used more often, especially since the comic is called The Witch's Road. I didn't like the change of artwork throughout these issues. I liked the addition of Agatha and what the price of magic was doing to Wanda's soul. I liked the vow of silence she took in, I think, one of the last issues, and the artwork is just her, I think, killing people, or somebody gets killed, or it's like a little assassin thing. I just really liked it. I thought it was really cool, and that part was really well done. Yeah, and I think she did that to save a girl and to get rid of the hex on that girl. So that part of that issue was really well done. It was a good overall read. The fourth book I read was Deadpool versus Wolverine, and this was just like a thick collection of their stories together, and I rated that one 3.5 stars. So it's various issues of Deadpool and Wolverine either working together or fighting against each other in one big collection. I like the various illustrations throughout this collection. I like seeing the variety of Deadpool and Wolverine working together, and then some of them being enemies against each other. Though I did get bored throughout the first half, the second half of the collection was where it was at, and I really enjoyed myself while reading the second half of the collection. Most of the time I found myself rooting for Wolverine over Deadpool because sometimes the latter got annoying. Overall, I really enjoyed this one. The fifth book I read was My Vampire Plus One, and I rated this one 4.5 stars. So Amelia she needs to bring a date to her cousin's wedding. And after bumping into Reginald, who is a vampire, he owes her a favor, and so she convinces him to be her fake boyfriend to bring to her family before this wedding. And will this fake relationship turn into something real? It's also a sequel to the book My Roommate's a Vampire. I enjoyed this book a lot more than the first book. I really liked Reginald's and Amelia's chemistry with each other, and it felt believable. The resolution with Reginald and the collective was done way better than the first book and how that ended, because that was just really cringe. I really liked the sex scenes, and I laughed out loud several times throughout this book. Amelia felt stupid at times, but overall I really liked her and Reginald. Reginald was he was my favorite character in the first book, and he was my favorite character in this one. And I think there was a scene in this book that just felt off, because I think a certain character forgives another, but what was said in the page prior didn't make sense of why they got forgiven, so it just felt off. But I really, really enjoyed this one. After that one, the sixth book I read was A Game of Fate, and I read this one 4.5 stars. So it's the first book in Hades' perspective in the Hades and Persephone's series. I really enjoyed this book, and I'm glad it wasn't just a rehash of A Touch of Darkness. Yes, I had some of the same story beats, but it was done well enough that it didn't feel just like a rehash. And we got to see Hades from his point of view. We also meet Theseus and how his favor comes to be in the later books, and how some of the story beats we learn now do lead on to the later books. We also see the ultra protectiveness and brutalness of Hades firsthand, rather than just seeing it through Persephone's. I didn't think I was going to enjoy myself that much while reading this book, but I enjoyed myself a lot. And I got a better understanding of who Hades was as a person reading through his POV than I just did while reading it through Persephone's. After that, I read A Game of Retribution, and I read this one 4.75 stars. So it's the second Hades book told in the Hades and Persephone series. And I really enjoyed this book, and even though it is from Hades' perspective and has some of the same story beats, it just felt new and good. And I had a problem with the second Persephone's book because there was a lack of communication. And this book, the lack of communication makes sense and didn't irk me as much as it did in the second Persephone's book. I liked the introduction of Dionysus and Ariadne in this book, and how this foreshadow is used later in the other books. And we learn more about Zophi and Theseus. This was one of my favorite books in the series, and I especially liked the character growth and arcs of the characters and how it led to future books. After that, I read Malice, and I rated that one 4 stars. So it's a retelling of Sleeping Beauty, but instead of focusing on Aurora, it's focused on Alice, who is our Maleficent in this story. I enjoyed myself way more than I thought I would while reading this. The politics part confused me a little bit, but along with the curse rules, but they got more understandable as the book went on. I really liked the relationship between Alice and Aurora, especially as they grew. I liked that even though it was a retelling, it wasn't just, here's 10,000 references about Sleeping Beauty. Yes, there were references, but they weren't pounded in my head. The references were used for the plot and were important, or they were just like, hey, here's a little Easter egg. So I liked that. The book also made me gasp, especially in the last 30 pages. The 30 pages of this book are beautiful. I love the last 30 pages of this book. It just made me gasp so many times, and I wanted to chuck the book against the wall, and I'm like, I need to read the second one, but I had another book I had to read beforehand, and I was just so excited. The book, the ending just left me on a cliffhanger, and I'm like, but because it was so good. It was so good, and I didn't expect it to end that way, and it did, and it was just so good. After that, I read A Game of Gods, and I rated that one 4.25 stars. So it's the third book in Hades' perspective, in the Hades Persephone's books. So this book is different, as instead of just focusing on Hades' perspective, we get 3 POVs in this one. We get Hades, we get Hades, Dionysus, and Theseus. I really hate Theseus. Most of it was Hades, though. I do have a small gripe that just me, but like most of the time when like Hades and Persephone were trying to get it on, Hermes or like Apollo would show up and stop it because they had favors or they needed to tell them to do something, and it just got really annoying. This one, I'm like, guys, figure out your timing better. So this book gave me more insight into what happens in A Touch of Chaos, and it made things a little less confusing for me. Touch of Chaos wasn't confusing, but learning and reading this book, it made more things more understandable. There were good sex scenes between both couples, and I like seeing Theseus' POV and how his plans came to be, especially when it leads to A Touch of Chaos. It was a good read, and if I hadn't read A Touch of Chaos, with how this book ended on a cliffhanger, I'd be so excited to read Touch of Chaos, but I've already read Touch of Chaos, but it left me on a really good cliffhanger. This was my last read of the series, and it was a really good read. I really enjoyed the characters. I love seeing their arcs, and I'm really sad I have to leave these characters. After that, I read Misrule, and I rated that one 3.5 stars. So this is the sequel to Malice. 100 years have passed since Aurora's sleeping curse, and Briar, which is the name of the kingdom, is under the Dark Court. The Dark Court is ruled by Alice and other various creatures in the land who have been abused from that kingdom and other kingdoms around. So can Alice find a way to wake Aurora? And if so, is 100 years away from each other going to break their love for each other as well? So I really liked Malice, and I hoped I was going to really enjoy this one as well. And this book just kind of disappointed me, especially with how excited I was, and it just kind of let me down. The story was okay, but I thought, like how I said, it was going to be something similar to Malice, and it wasn't. I didn't like Derek. I knew as soon as Derek got introduced, I'm like, that's Philip, and it was. And some of the politics stuff was hard to follow. As soon as I met Derek, I'm like, I hate this guy. He's annoying. I knew who he was going to be, and I'm like, I hate him. I wish that, I know there was a sex scene in the first one that I liked, and I wish there was a sex scene in this one, but there wasn't. I wish we got the full unleashing of Mortana, who is like the little spirit power that's in Alice in this one. Wish we got like a full unleashing of her power. I did like the little love triangle between Alice, Regan, and Aurora throughout, and I liked how Aurora's story ended. Rose's ending was good too. I really hated Rose. And the cover of the book was beautiful. It's light purple, and I love light purple. And I just loved the cover of this book. Like, if the book was better, I would have owned this book. But the book was not better, but I just loved the cover. I would just keep the cover of this book because I loved the cover of the book. It was so beautiful. After that, I read The Book Swap, and I rated that one 3.5 stars. So after leaving her favorite book accidentally in a Letting library, Erin gets it back. But there's somebody else's writing in there other than her own. And so her and this person decide to switch books and leave books in the Letting library, write notes to each other. But it turns out both these people, Erin and the guy named James, have a history, and they don't know that the other is writing the notes to each other. So can they get over this history and make a future for themselves, or will their past keep them in chains? So I like the idea of this book, but I wish it was done differently. So when they were talking about comments, the author would just have the comments written out, and I wish we got like the actual pages of the book, and then like the notes and the actual margins, like we were talking, like the book talks about, because I think that would have been done. I know that they couldn't do that because of copyright, but I wish that would have been a cool way to be able to have done that, because they would have been actually in the margins. The story was good, and I liked how James and Aaron went from friends when they were younger to like lovers to enemies to lovers, though I wish they had been lovers in both parts a little longer. I liked the books that were used throughout, and I liked how both characters changed throughout the story, I especially liked how the story starts with the fundraiser and sort of ends with the fundraiser, and that both characters, James and Aaron, I think both times they unintentionally end up wearing like very similar costumes to each other. So I did like that little idea. I'm like, that's very cute. After that, I read Someone in the Attic, and I rated this one 3.5 stars. So after one of her friends dies, Julia starts seeing videos of someone in black coming out of her attic and taking videos around her house. Who is the man hiding in her attic, and does he have to do something with her past? So it's an okay read with an interesting premise. I liked the idea, but I wish it would have been done better. I liked learning about Donna and Riley, but they were just red herrings and didn't do anything for the story-wise. They're just red herrings, like Drew. The after chapter of the book was just kind of weird and gave us epilogues for characters that only made reference to a couple of times, and it's like, okay, why are they getting an epilogue? They don't need an epilogue. I know they can get their comeuppance, but it made no sense to me. The story was kind of slow at times, but I also liked how short the chapters were. I love short chapters. I also liked how Julia and Gabe co-parented with their kids. So one parent would stay with the kids at the house, and one parent would stay in the apartment, which was like a few minutes walk. And depending on which parent had them, the parents would switch where they lived. So I liked how that was done. The second to last book I read was Galatea, and I rated this one 4 stars. So it's a retelling of Galatea. If you're not familiar with the story, a man makes a statue, the statue comes to life, and then the man makes a family with said statue. So it's written by Madeline Miller, who wrote Circe and Song of Achilles, 2 books which I really loved this year. And this book was also on my TBR for a while. I found it at Barnes & Noble, and I had to get it because, like, the book was, like, this big, and it was so cute, and I'm like, I need to get this book. It had also been on my TBR. I'm like, I need to get this book. It's so cute, and I need to have it. I like the story. The timeline-wise was a little confusing, trying to figure out when certain things were happening. I liked how we got a full story in, like, 50 pages, and I liked how it ended. Book didn't disappoint, but it was different than what I expected, but in a good way. I really loved the book, and I liked how she got her revenge in the ocean at the end, and how she kind of like turns to stone and drags her husband with her. And then the last book I read was Jezebel, and I rated this one 4 stars as well. So it's a reimagining of the story of Jezebel from the Bible. It had been on my TBR for a while, and I went to Barnes & Noble, and I finally got it. It followed the important story parts and beats of Jezebel's story from the Bible, but changed them up so we see them from Jezebel's perspective rather than in third person that we see in the Bible. I liked how Elijah was introduced as a scribe before we learned about him as a prophet, and who he was beforehand and what his relationship was like with Jezebel. Sometimes how time was told was very confusing. They'd be like, oh, blah, 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 this happened, and it's been 2 years since this. And it's like, well, that would have been nice to know at the beginning of this chapter instead of me thinking it was the same time. Because I think like 15 or so years passed throughout this book, but they don't let us know. They do a good job of letting us when time passes. They'd be like, oh yeah, this happened, and it's been X amount of years since I had this kid, or this event happened. It's like, this would have been nice to know beginning, so I'm not thinking or imagining you at the same age when you're not, or this is around the same time period. I liked how it was a new retelling of Jezebel, and it gave her more humanity than what we see in the Bible, and we actually see her as a person. And you really feel for her, especially at the end of the book when she gets like postpartum depression, when she goes a little mad and crazy, But when she does that, it makes sense. Why? Because of everything that's happened in this book and all the trauma she goes through, especially at the end. It's you really feel for her as a character. And I liked how this book humanized a villain from the Bible, and I thought it was really well done. So those were the 14 books I read in December. If you have any recommendations and what I should read in the next year, let me know down below. Otherwise, I'll see you next month. Bye.